All right, welcome to the next segment of our lit term review here as we go into characterization. All right, so I'm sure you've seen this before, but direct characterization is when you tell us, or the author tells us what a character is like. They just tell us he's tall or sarcastic or whatever. And then indirect characterization is when they show us. All right, so maybe the character hits his head on the top of the door jamb on the way in, or says something really sarcastic, and we just kind of infer, what he's like. And so, direct, tell, indirect, show. Again, that's probably a review for you. Now, round characters and flat characters. Round characters are like three-dimensional characters. They're multifaceted. They're like a real human being. And so they can be inconsistent. They have the potential for growth. Whereas flat characters are like two-dimensional characters, are more of a type, like the villain, the ingenue, stuff like that. And so there's usually not a lot of change that happens there. Static character, it's kind of a very similar thing we have going on here. Doesn't change very much, and things happen to them, not within them. All right, things happen on the outside, not on the inside. A dynamic character, however, things happen inside. They're modified by the actions and experiences of the novel or play or poem. And that's one of the objectives of the work. In fact, I've heard actors say that they'll often read the first page and the last page of a script, and if that character is the same at the last page as he was at the beginning, they don't really want to read the rest of it. All right. Well, let's bring up the question, could you have a round character who is static or a flat character? And so not very often, but I think there are some times, right? The dynamic character tends to be your protagonist. An antagonist isn't always as dynamic, but they can be. Sometimes we like switch sides and things, right? And so, I think that Thanos is kind of round but static. He's capable of inconsistencies. He wants to save the universe by killing half of it. And he's capable of great power and rage and stuff like that, but he's actually quite calm and collected all the time, right? He has a clear vision. But in the end, he persists. He never changes. He never recants that vision. And so that might be an example of a round, yes, static character. But it's true. Most times it's flat goes to static and round goes with dynamic. All right. A caricature, we've seen these in drawings and things where we highlight a very specific characteristic physically. Well, in literature, there can also be non-physical characteristics that are over-exaggerated to a ridiculous effect. And that's also a caricature as opposed to a character. And so, if you have a character who just always just praises the upper class or something like that over and over again, to a ridiculous point where he's not believable as a real person, then that perhaps is a way that character, or rather caricature, is critiquing that aspect of society and people in society who are like that. All right, a foil. I know you've probably heard about this before, but it is a contrasting character. And so the term comes from, before you had lighted display cases, you would literally put a piece of foil under a jewel so that light would reflect, and it would, kind of increase the brilliance of the jewel. And of course, you then had something that was shiny but very cheap underneath something that, touching something that was very expensive and shiny. And so in literature, it's the same thing. You will have two characters who are similar characteristics or circumstances, but then there's some place where they are distinctly divergent, right? And so two opposite characters are not foils. But two characters had similar upbringings and similar circumstances, but then there's one trait that's different. That's a foil. And so what happens is it becomes reflective, just like, foil. And then, it kind of highlights that characteristic in the main character. So for example, if you watch this summer, we see, Hamilton and Aaron Burr. They're both orphans. They both go to Princeton and graduate early. They become revolutionaries, but one is very reserved. It says, talk less, smile more. Whereas the other is gregarious and bold and headstrong, and the contrast really kind of highlights that characteristic. I'm not throwing away my shot. All right, and then focalization or focusing. When you're asked about perspective and point of view, we often get tracked into saying, well, first, second, third person, limited omniscient. But there's a lot more within and in between those things, right? You can have a third person point of view that really kind of focuses on a specific character as opposed to having like this umbrella narrator thing. And so one way that that's done is through this like kind of focalization here. And so we'll look at an example where instead of having tagged speech or quotation mark speech, the narrator will actually adopt some of the language of one of the characters, sort of the speech patterns and things like this, or vocabulary. And what that does then is that it kind of gets us into that character's head, right? Even though the narrator is not that character. For example, this is from The Jilting of Granny Weatherall, which you're about to read. It says, "She flicked her wrist neatly out of Dr. Harry's pudgy, careful fingers and pulled the sheet up to her chin. The brat ought to be in knee breeches, doctoring around the country with those spectacles on his nose. Get along now. Take your school books and go. There's nothing wrong with me." So you'll notice that the last part was the part in quotes, the thing that she actually said. The part that I bolded here is the narrator. It's not Granny Weatherall, but it sure sounds like her, right? And so it kind of like gets us into her head and really focuses on this character, even though she's not speaking per se. So that's one way that, a third person point of view can also be like focused on a specific character and show a little bit more nuance and so forth. All right, so as you're reading through your building roman novels, pay attention to the way that characters are well characterized. And not just like, this is a round character, this is a flat character, but, what are the events that show us what a character is like? What are the quotes that really kind of highlight this characteristic? And most importantly, what are the characteristics that the author wants us to focus on? Okay, because often through those is where we get to the meat of the novel, of the critique it has, the themes it has, and things like this. And at the end of the quarter, you'll do a presentation on one of the characters in the novel that you've chosen to read. And so as you're going through, like tagging and finding, highlighting, or writing out the important quotes that characterize somebody will help you out later on. All right, so this is a short one. Come back for the next one, and we will read The Jilting of Granny Weatherall together. And I'll go through some of the stuff that you might do while you're annotating, because that'll be part of the year. On the exam, you'll get a piece of prose just like we're about to read. And being able to think about it in this way is how you get to your response. All right, well, thanks a lot, and I hope you have a great day.